I moved 11 different times in the next 7 years. I lived in a bus, I lived in a van. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, or welcome back. My name is Jordan Sparks, and I am a dance coach, performing artist, and YouTuber. So, in today's video, I was questioning for the longest time why, how, and really if I was ever going to make this video. So, over the last while, I have mentioned in a few of my past videos that I was kidnapped as a child, and a bunch of you guys have asked me to tell that story or asked for more details. And I honestly have just been struggling as to why I would ever make that video. And for me, the reason why it's a struggle is because this isn't like a funny story time video. This is my actual life. And I didn't want to make this as like just a pity party. I wanted to not really ever talk about this on my channel, to be honest. And so I was struggling with why would I ever tell this story. And the biggest reason why it was a struggle for me is because I kept going through my head as to like, how am I going to explain this? How am I going to explain everybody's sides? And then I just kind of like laughed at myself because I've always thought that this doesn't affect me anymore and that this is something that I've come to terms with and dealt with over the years. But then I realized it's not my job to explain everybody else's actions. It's not my job to explain why this happened to me. It's not my job to even rationalize this or make sense of this. This is just my life. This is just what has happened to me. And that's when I decided that's why I'm going to post this video, because it is not your guys' job. If something terrible has happened to you, if you've had a past trauma, if something horrible happened to you or somebody did something horrible to you, it is not your job to explain why that happened. It's not your job to understand why that happened. It's just your job to heal yourself and to move on. So I'm going to start this story from there. So I grew up in a small town, in like a small country town in Alberta, Canada, and I had two older brothers, and I grew up in a very poor neighborhoods, and it was August, I believe 28th, right before I started kindergarten. Somebody that I was very close to and I trusted came to my house to pick up me and my brothers and take us out for the day. And I remember we went to the library, and this person got my oldest brother to take out books on trauma and childhood neglect and all of these other different things. And I didn't really understand why that was happening. And then we drove back to my house, and we dropped off my oldest brother, and me and my other brother drove off with this person that we trusted. And now this is what is important, because I remember being like, oh, why isn't my oldest brother coming with us? But because I trusted this person and I was literally 5 years old, I didn't think anything of it. And that is, I think, how trauma affects us later in life, because I never realized anything was really going on wrong because I trusted this person and I was like, oh, we're going on an adventure. And so we left the city and we drove for hours and hours and hours. I remember falling asleep in the backseat of the car. And it was this person's friend that was driving us. Um, and then we crossed the border from Alberta into British Columbia. And we kept driving until we got to Prince George. And when we got to Prince George, we got out and we ended up staying at this person that was driving's house overnight. We were there for one night. And then, sorry, this gives me like anxiety. I'm probably going to be like a mess talking about this the entire time, just like my heart's palpitating. Anyway, so we stayed overnight in Prince George for that one night. And then we started hitchhiking. And in retrospect, I'm like, oh my god, why was a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old boy hitchhiking? Like, that's absolutely insane to me, but that was what was going on at the time. And a couple people picked us up. I remember this old man gave us like bananas and helped us out with food. And then nobody really ever asked like what was going on, I don't think. I don't know. I don't know why this didn't like trigger that something horrible was going on in my brain. And so we ended up hitchhiking this other person picked us up and drove us to Vancouver. And once we got to Vancouver, they ended up paying for our ferry tickets for me and my brother and the person that had kidnapped us. And we went across on the ferry to Nanaimo. And basically, to speed through what had happened, I ended up living in 11 different homes. I moved 11 different times in the next 7 years. I lived in a bus, I lived in a van, I went to multiple different schools. I remember being thoroughly coached as to like what would happen if social services ever approached me and things like that. Now, this is where the story gets to a point that I can't understand, I can't explain, and it's not my job to explain. So after about 4 years of being kidnapped, I was actually returned to go visit my mom. And me and my brother went back to go visit my mom. And at that point, my mom had like a new baby, and the baby was already like 3 years old, and that's my youngest brother, and that was the first time that we had met. And then I was reuniting with my oldest brother for the first time in 4 years, and we went back with the kidnapper after. And I still to this day don't understand like why that happened, and I don't really need an explanation. Like I said, I don't need to explain why that happened. It's not my job to rationalize what had happened. And then we went back with this kidnapper and we lived there for another several years, moving all over the place. And then it was when I was 11 years old on Christmas Day that I was returned to my mom. Now, the reason why this did not ring a giant bell to me in my head is because the person that kidnapped me was my biological father. And for some reason, I have always felt like, it's not my place to tell this story, or like, I need to protect my mom in this story, or I need to protect my dad in this story. And it's not my job to protect those people, and what happened wasn't right, and it was not ever something that I had to be able to explain or something that I needed to rationalize. And for some reason, I always took that onto myself to rationalize it. And my father was very mentally ill. And I realized this at about 5 years old because I needed to start taking care of him. And my older brother helped take care of him as well. My father was illiterate, and he had all these suspicions about people and different things. And me and my brother were like given this whole manipulative story as to why we were taken away in the first place. And so for years and years and years, I didn't think that anything like terrible had happened. I thought that I was saved. Like I was convinced that I had been saved. And at the end of the day, that's not what happened. And I don't need to explain like what had happened, why we were taken in the first place, or what was going on in my mother's house or that situation, because that's not really my story to tell. Or maybe I just don't want to. My side of that story, I don't really care to tell. But when my dad took us, we ended up living and taking care of him for 7 years. This is somebody that had a very strong mental illness. They weren't being treated. They didn't work a job. And I remember holding all of this resentment, and I just didn't understand why my dad didn't work. And I grew up surrounded by a life of crime, and to me it was almost explained to me and in my head like rationalized as like, oh, my dad is like a Robin Hood kind of character. But like for years and years and years and years, every single night we would go out, my dad would drive around and cut down like parking meters and steal all of the coins from them, and like cut down pay phones and break them apart, saw them apart with chainsaws and take all of the money from them, and break into golf courses and steal all of the cans and bottles. And that is how we lived for several years. And that's why I lived in a van, and that's why I lived in a bus and moved around all the time. And I was just kind of coached that social services was bad and that if somebody came and talked to me while I was at school that I needed to run away. Like I had all of these like escape plans and stuff coached for me since I was really, really young. And as I got older, like we're talking only like second grade, I just realized something was really wrong. My father was not mentally there. Like you could try and talk to him for like an hour and you just couldn't get through to him. He would literally just be in his own world. And I would later find out that he was a paranoid schizophrenic and was dealing with his mental illness and schizophrenia the entire time. And that basically would explain why he was the way that he was. And it wasn't until I was older that I realized that I was not saved. I was taken from one traumatic environment to end up taking care of my father, who was traumatized and unable to take care of himself. And that's no place for a child to be put in because I was a child. I can't take care of an adult at 5 years old, but I was put in that place to do that anyways. And I lived like that for 7 years, and it was on Christmas Day that my brother and I were returned to my mom, and I just don't understand why, when I was returned to go visit my mom, why I went back with my mentally ill father that didn't have a job and was unable to take care of us. I still, to this day, I don't understand. Like, I don't know. But that is this story, and there's so much more to this story. I'm just kind of giving you guys like the quick glossed over version because I honestly like I don't know, it'd probably take like a session of therapy to sit down and like remember everything and recall like what all had happened. I just remember I wasn't allowed friends. I remember my dad being paranoid and thinking like bubbles were bugs, and he thought that I couldn't go to the dentist because they would be implanting like speakers into my mouth so that the FBI and stuff could hear me. And you might think that that's funny, but it's really not funny. It was something that I had to deal with my entire life, being so frustrated because my dad was struggling so hard with this mental illness, and I was taking care of him when I needed somebody to take care of me. And so I guess that has really shaped me into the person that I am today. I was not allowed to have friends, so I grew up all confined to myself. I had cats, I read a lot of books, and I kind of lived in this fantasy land of like one day my life would be amazing and one day I'd be able to help people and one day I'd be able to inspire people. And I remember just I was really really bullied at school because nobody understood what was going on, and I couldn't explain because I didn't really understand what was going on. I just knew that I didn't have food, I wasn't taken care of, I didn't have lunches for school. I would just be taken out of school for like a month at a time, where we would just switch schools randomly or move and there was no notice. And I would always be going to school in dirty clothes, and if anybody saw my father, they realized that he had like long dirty hair and like cropped off shirts, and his style was like super like bohemian and almost like transient, like homeless. My dad later became entirely homeless after I was returned to my mom, and so I always like carried a lot of grief and guilt about that, as if it was like if I would have stayed with him and wasn't returned to my mom, maybe I could have saved him, or maybe he would have not been homeless, or maybe he would have lived. But at the end of the day, that's not my job, and it's not something I have to understand, and it wasn't my place to save him. It's just my story. And so I hope that what you guys get from this story is that if you're carrying all of this grief, or you're carrying this guilt for something that has happened to you, or you feel like you could have done something else, or you have regrets, that it's not your fault. And it's not your job to understand what happened to you. It's not your job to rationalize it. It's not your job to explain why it happened to you. And all that is your job is to be able to love yourself and to move on, to be able to understand that those things happened to you, but it was not your fault, and it was not because of anything that you did, and there's nothing that you could have done to change it. Fate is fate, and whatever happened in your life has already happened, and the best that you can do is move on and heal from it and become a better person, and maybe let your story empower you to help heal others, would be, to me, the best end goal. to have trauma turn into beautiful butterflies. I don't know. I don't know how to put that, but basically to have something beautiful flourish and grow from the trauma. The phoenix rises from the ashes. But I guess that is it for this story. Like I said, I could go on forever and ever and ever with all of the nitty bitty gritty details, but I don't need to. And you don't owe it to anybody to explain your traumas either. So I hope that this video helped some of you guys, and if you have any other questions about this, feel free to ask them below. It's not something to me that I feel is like really touchy or taboo. Like, I am open to talk about this. It's something that I have been healing from for most of my life, but I don't know. If there's anything that you guys want to ask and there's something that I can tell you that is going to help you or is going to help you heal, or you're just curious, then feel free to ask anyways. And I will answer if it is not too personal. And yeah, I guess that is it for this video. So, as always, if you are new to my channel, what I like to say to the Sparkly family is to be weird, be wild, and stay sparkly. And basically what that means is to feel empowered, because to be weird is not a bad thing. To have your own quirks and your own individuality and your own uniqueness is what makes you you. And that's what I mean when I say be weird. Be wild just means be free, do you, boo, and stay sparkly, because you are sparkly and amazing, and let your energy shine through and radiate from within. Okay, that is it for this video. I love you guys so much, and thank you guys for watching. Bye-bye.